So welcome to today's Centre of Excellence Roundtable. As usual, we have a fantastic panel who are going to give us their perspectives on a Centre of Excellence. Marissa Taylor is Head of Salesforce Architecture and Development at S&P Global. Sean Wiemet, who's the Salesforce Practice Leader at MasterSolve, and Matt Blocker, who's an independent CTO and CIO. And my name is Ian Govt, so I'm the CEO of Elements.cloud. So we've got some great questions for the panel, but I'm sure the discussion will take us in some very interesting areas. But before we start that, I just want to level set and get a clear understanding from everybody about what we think a Centre of Excellence is. So the first, what is a Centre of Excellence and why do I need one? We like to think about a Centre of Excellence as having 13 pillars. Now, before people go, hang on, I can't possibly have a Centre of Excellence because I don't have 13 people. The first point that these are skills, not roles. So we think that these are the aspects that you need to have in place if you're going to manage a successful Salesforce implementation. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time going in through each in detail, but if you go to elements.cloud/COE, there's a detailed article that goes through each one of these and drills into them in a lot more detail. But let's just think about, the first is vision. Do you have a vision for how Salesforce is going to be used and how it relates to the other systems across your IT landscape? The next is, do you have leadership in place? Who are the people who care about the return on investment, who are writing the checks for Salesforce and give you the support and the direction that you need? The next is governance. What's the framework for managing change, for signing off those changes that as you start to prioritize the work to enhance and exploit Salesforce? So what's that governance framework, which then leads us to change control? So what is the mechanism for driving those changes through? Methodology is thinking about your implementation methodology. Is it agile, waterfall, or a combination of the two? And what are the phases you go through in terms of capturing requirements, driving out user stories, doing the work, and then driving adoption? When we think about standards, it's not just the coding standards, it's what are the standards for documentation? What are the standards for training? What are the standards for how you write requirements? So again, getting some consistency across your implementation or implementations. And as you'll hear later, people on the panel have multiple orgs. So how do we get that consistency across the different implementations? Metadata management has come to the fore if you think about Facebook's recent outage, which was due to a config change, which brought down the system. I think people are now recognizing with low code and no code applications, metadata management is as important as user management and data management. The next stage is architecture. When we're thinking about implementing a system, we need to consider the architecture before we start launching into building objects and writing flows. Again, Salesforce is now doubling down on architecture. At the recent Dreamforce presentations, Parker Harris was on stage saying architecture reports to me. So, which is great that Salesforce are now saying this stuff's really important. Getting architecture up front has a huge impact in terms of the level of technical debt, but also the ability to scale and become agile in terms of using Salesforce. With all of this, again, security needs to be baked in up front. We can't be trying to put sticking plasters or band-aids on systems to try and lock down security. It needs to be designed in from the beginning. Next point there is change management. We're not talking about the changes to systems. That's all about change control and your metadata management, but change management in terms of changing the hearts and minds of people. We need to make sure that we drive adoption of our systems, which means we need to make sure that we've brought our people along with us, which is people, process, and then technology. So change management is about the people and the process. PMO is Program Management Office. Again, if you have a big program, maybe you're now needing to coordinate the different implementations, you're coordinating the return on investment, starting to drive out that earned value statements, the project management. So again, a PMO. Tooling is all about what are the enterprise tools you need to support your Centre of Excellence. Is it a change intelligence platform like Elements? Is it a DevOps tool? Is it backup? So those enterprise tools that you need to be able to manage the whole of the implementation? Is it Jira for requirements capture? Is it some sort of wireframing application for building out those applications? So the tooling, again, is something that runs across all those implementations and gives you that consistency, but also supports or underpins all the items above. And finally, prototyping. We hear from a lot of Centre of Excellences teams where they have multiple implementations, that team often is involved in pulling the best or the best of examples from any one implementation, or even taking examples and prototyping them out and then being able to deliver those back to the different implementations. So they are a Centre of Excellence, but also they're the Centre of Innovation. So the question for people is, well, do I really need to do one? A report by 10K Advisors, they surveyed about 300 customers and discovered that those with the highest return on investment had a Centre of Excellence in place. So there is a business case for doing this. If you have a Centre of Excellence, you're more likely to drive the return on investment out of your Salesforce implementation. And I said at the beginning that this is about skills, not roles. And if you're looking at this going, hang on, Ian, there's no way I can do this for our implementation. We don't have time for this. We're just a small implementation. We can't possibly do all 13. The good news is that it's phased. So if you look at this chart here, if it's a white circle, that means it doesn't necessarily need to be in place. If it's a yellow circle, it's a good idea to have it in place. If it's red, it's mandatory. So you can see if you're a small implementation, and by small, I mean it may not have many users. You may not be very strategic. It's quite siloed. It may be just in the department. You can get away with not having everything in place. When I go to the extreme right-hand side and I say a large implementation, that doesn't necessarily mean a huge number of users, but large may be in terms of how important it is strategically to the company. It may be a limited number of users in a highly regulated industry, such as wealth management or in pharma, where it's strategically important, and therefore we need to have all of these in place. So as I said, if you go to elements.cloud/COE, there's a more detailed document which you can dig into. But what I really want to do now is, we don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from the people who spend their time worrying about a Centre of Excellence. So let's meet the panel. So Marissa Taylor is Head of Salesforce Architecture and Development at S&P Global. But before that, she had a very interesting history or life in health as the Virginia Institute of Autism, and then Director of Philanthropy at a local food hub. So again, different perspectives on Salesforce implementations, but now she's in the heart of a major organization with multiple orgs. So it'd be very interesting to hear her perspectives on what it takes to run a Centre of Excellence. Sean Ouimet is the Salesforce practice leader at MasterSolve, spent a number of years as a consultant working obviously with different clients, both in the Salesforce ecosystem, but before that he was also an Oracle implementation consultant in cloud, so therefore has seen it not just from the Salesforce perspective, but also from some other platforms. And then Matt Blocker. Matt's an independent CIO now, working with a number of clients, but before he decided to step out, he was the CIO at Cloud Sherpas. So some of you who've been around the Salesforce ecosystem a while will remember that Cloud Sherpas was one of the top Salesforce systems integrators, and his life there, where they went through 10 acquisitions, which meant he's been through 10 org mergers. And then obviously, if you remember, Cloud Sherpas was acquired by Accenture. So then he joined Accenture and then had to manage the merge of the org from Cloud Sherpas into Accenture. So again, I'm fascinated to hear some of his perspectives on how that works. Thank you. First of all, thank you for taking time out of what are obviously very busy days to spend time on the panel. I know this is a topic that a number of people across the ecosystem are interested in. We had a huge number of people who've registered for this session and for previous sessions. So thank you for joining us. So first of all, can I start with you, Marissa? Obviously you've got multiple orgs at S&P Global. Can you talk us through sort of the evolution of the Centre of Excellence, or how it works across those multiple orgs?
Sure. Thank you so much, first of all, for having me. I'm happy to join all of you today. I think evolution is the exact right term for a center of excellence. For us, it really started out of necessity. In the very beginning, our teams and our instances were, siloed in separate business units. And over the years, we came together, starting with just some basic standards of how we would implement, how we would work together, and then growing into how we connect with our stakeholders, how we deliver for them, aligning our tooling, all the things that you chatted about. So our process has evolved over multiple years. One of the things I was thinking about as you were going through your slides is when you think about Salesforce as a system, 8, maybe even like 5 years ago, we were really just Sales Cloud and Service Cloud, for the most part. Now you've got, Experience Cloud and Tableau CRM and all of the other implementations. And so going from a basic CRM into the foundation of an entire ecosystem and how things are connected for your business is sort of the evolvement of what Salesforce is in our org and how we use it. And so if we don't have all of these systems in place, all of these processes in place with our center of excellence, we don't know what a change or modification or enhancement is going to do to our downstream and upstream systems. And therefore, we don't know, we might be introducing bugs or other issues into our orgs, and that can have real dollar impact. So the COE has become crucial to our implementation across the board. I think now what's really exciting for us when we think about the Center of Excellence and the role it plays is we're really focused on our stakeholder relationships and building out, with our key end users, building out frequent touch points, frequent communication, so that we have a really good handle on what their needs are and how we can build for them, and then how we can build from a perspective of enterprise-wide. So thinking package development model and going into, building once and deploying in multiple orgs, rather than thinking building in silos and separately multiple times. So we're starting to see some real efficiency gain and benefit from this as well.
Sure, Sean, you spend life as a consultant. That Marissa's talked about what feels like a fairly sophisticated implementation of a center of excellence. So can you contrast that with some of the experiences that you've had?
Absolutely, Ian. And thank you again for having me today on the panel. My situation is a little bit different in setting up a center of excellence for a federal agency. So there's a different level of complexity there. Each application that is used by a federal agency needs to undergo a process called the Authority to Operate, ATO. So that's a very long process of putting together a security controls plan and then defining each application in the ecosystem as under the GSS. So you can have all orgs and all applications under a GSS control plan so that it's easy to deploy them regardless of instance, because they all cover those controls. Or you can classify them as major versus minor. If they're minor, there's a lot less restrictions that you have there. So really putting those definitions into place is something that I worked hard at with the team when I was part of leading that effort for the Center of Excellence at this federal agency. So understanding what is a good long-term strategy for your security plan for your ATO process, and then looking at the way that everyone is using Salesforce. So they were using 8 instances that go back to 2012, all the way up until the present year. And there was a split. Half of those instances were owned by the business, half were owned by IT, and there's a big struggle to get them all under one banner. So really understanding what is the release management methodology. You have 5 different SIs working all over the place and not coordinating release calendars. There was no way to understand refresh life cycles. So, certain SIs would be refreshing sandboxes at the wrong time, where it would go into that preview instance capability. So what the agency wanted to do as more of a quick win was establish the ATO. When we onboarded, the ATO was going to expire in a couple weeks. So that was huge priority for the office of the CIO and office of the CTO. And then getting a release management protocol and standardization across the board for minor applications, so that we could then assign our release manager to walk them through the process of, here are the steps we need. We need the data dictionary. And that's a huge issue if it's not part of the contract to then create a data dictionary. So something that allows them to be able to bring that to us immediately, have our release manager review it. Our release manager understands the codependencies. Are there any duplicate pieces of metadata that we're creating? What's part of this release? What are the dependencies and how is it going to affect the current architecture? So that we could come back with our recommendations, or we could go to the architecture review board, give it thumbs up, give it thumbs down, give it thumbs in the middle, to make sure that that release is going to be successful. And we don't need to worry about, we need to bring this all down into a hotfix sandbox, because you've now deployed this into a mission critical application that has gotten congressional funding, and we now need to bring it back a different layer because now it's got visibility. So cutting down on those pieces. So really, I think going back to Marissa's points, there are a lot of elements at place for creating a COE, and there's a lot of different places to start. So just looking at whether it's a federal agency or a global enterprise organization, what are the critical challenges for the project teams on the day-to-day? Because all the dreams and aspirations and long-term vision of someone like the CIO or the CTO is really lived out day-to-day by those project managers. So they've got to understand the policies and procedures we're putting in place for us to be successful. So really getting buy-in both at the executive level, but also at the project team level and the program teams that are working. Because if they're not bought into it, it's kind of more of executives pushing it down their throat, which doesn't lead for good change management and even poor user adoption. So that's really where we started with the federal agency. We started with their platform security and with their release management procedures.
Marissa, you said it was born out of necessity. It sounds like, Sean, yours was actually, it's mandated just because of the life you're living in, and so the background environment. Matt, for you, presumably, so when you're dealing with clients, it's a very different picture. It doesn't sound like it's nearly as structured. Also, certainly if I think about the panelists I've had on previous roundtables, it doesn't feel nearly as structured as this.
So from my perspective, I've dealt with clients directly and implemented many systems and consolidated many orgs. But in my experience at Cloud Sherpas as CIO, we went through acquisition of many companies. They were not hostile takeovers. It was a high growth company, as you mentioned earlier, in the Salesforce space. Beyond Salesforce, it was also Google and ServiceNow. We ended up with 1,200 consultants, professional services consultants and developers globally, and then ultimately sold to Accenture. So as we were growing that company, though, it wasn't from a zero startup. It was, yes, it was funded from a zero, but it was the goal was to grow it by acquisition. So there obviously was a necessity for a center of excellence in guiding the company and the systems as we grew. And it's a people company, right? The professional services is dealing with clients, and it's the developers and the consultants are all people. So our systems were people systems, but also process systems for billing and time management, that kind of thing. And it was very critical to get buy-in from all of the business units that we were acquiring. Again, we had 3 silos of companies, and personalities we were acquiring also. And it was very critical. Center of Excellence is very critical to creating company culture. I believe that in all of my careers, systems have been the heartbeat of many companies, so it's critical that the management pushes down and involves, though, the next layer of management, and then the next layer of project managers or business owners, and are highly involved in a center of excellence, because the system is the heartbeat. And it's a negotiation process as you're acquiring companies or as you're consolidating orgs. You take best practices from best business practices from certain business units as you're consolidating. But the most critical thing is that you get leadership buy-in. So typically it's headed by, in my experience, I headed up the Center of Excellence steering committee, if you will, but the executive committee was on there, and then senior leadership also, and then they would bring in their project managers, and you have to have buy-in. And as the projects move along, the business leaders have to sponsor their needs, and you create their buy-in. If they're not going to speak up and not going to create ownership and provide their asks and their backing to projects, they don't happen. So it's very critical that they're highly involved in the process. And for every business, I don't think it should be a separate business unit or anything like that. Depending on how you're structured, IT can lead it, but it's really driven by the business itself, the business leaders, and it shouldn't just be somebody stopping by for a meeting every week. They have to be a real leader and a driver. The business leadership has to be involved, because the systems are their business lifeblood in reality. In most businesses, that's really the case.
So did you say that the Center of Excellence reports to the CIO and has the business involved, or does the business own the Center of Excellence?
That depends on the scale of the business. In our case, we ended up with 1,200 employees, and it effectively reported to IT. We didn't have a separate project management division, but it can exist in another division of the company if possible. But the IT part of the business is the most critical. So it's about company structure and culture, but it has to be driven in a way that you can affect change. And in my experience, IT has been closer to that. In many companies, though, that I've consulted with, the business is fragmented, and Salesforce and systems are very fragmented. We were fortunate at Cloud Sherpas that we were born in the cloud. We were a Salesforce consultancy partnership. We were the number 5 or 6 largest at the time. And so we were defined by our platform, and that was great. My background prior to that was in telecommunications, which was legacy systems, disparate systems. And when we had, back then, kind of a center of excellence, but it was very disparate because engineering did their thing, operations did their thing, customer service, billing, accounting. Back in the day, we didn't have consolidated systems as much. So, any goal of a company should be to consolidate systems, or at least a view of the systems integration of information. And if that is your goal, it should be, then you have to have an owner of that. In my world, it has been IT, but in depending on the business, it might be marketing, it could be accounting, finance, but somebody has to be the owner. It doesn't matter where it is. Someone is skill set. and aptitude, but you have to have an owner and a driver, but management has to be the on that board of the Center of Excellence, definitely.
So Marissa, you've got multiple implementations. So where does the Center of Excellence report to, and then how do you corral or coordinate the different owners?
Sure. Well, so we have a collaborative approach, and our team of developers and architects and admins, we all do flow under our CIO, which I think is a great place for us because it really gives us a good foundation to build on that Center of Excellence. What we do is with our business units, we really build in that collaboration. So they're coming to us with priorities. They have their PMO office, orgs that are, kind of planning things out and looking at what's coming for our next release cycles. So that way we can lean into our technical expertise, and they can lean into what's at the cusp of the business and where do they need to go. And that allows us to bring it together so that we're actually delivering, really thoughtful tools and features for our end users, ultimately making their lives a lot easier.
Sean, I mean, think about your federal agency, that was very specific, but if you think about some of the other experiences about Center of Excellence that you've run, business or IT, who's running it?
It's typically IT and typically the CIO, maybe in conjunction with the CTO, if you've got external facing capabilities that are process dependent on what the CIO is in charge of. And the reason for that is vision, especially I'll talk in my circumstance at the agency level, a new CIO will come in and they will take on a new initiative that is completely different. So the old initiative, what was the top of mind? That's kind of, we'll put that to the side. We'll put that in O&M, and this is going to be my new child, my new vision. And that vision is going to drive all those IT PMs and all those business project managers. So everyone on the functional and on the technical side, they're all going to be working towards that new goal. So putting this Center of Excellence there allows them to work as quickly as they can. And one of the biggest, I wouldn't say complaint, but worry is this better not slow me down. This better not halt a release through a bunch of, red tape that is going to prolong this, because I'm on a schedule, I'm on a timeline, and I've promised that we're going to have this up at such and such a date. And I think that's even more important for the federal space, because that's money that's taxpayer money that you're using and that you're going to be accountable for. So making sure that you've got good partners, but also a good framework in place to make sure that things are deployed correctly. You're doing it's essentially what the mandate indicates. So are you just moving a system of processes from on-prem to cloud, or are you changing the way that individuals interact with that system? There's two different things. What is the mandate? It's not enough to just bring the old processes to the cloud. You need to change the way that citizens or users, business users of the system interact with the platform. You're there to change really that employee experience and that customer experience, not just to change the infrastructure. So typically what I see, it's at the CIO, CTO level. They could have a hybrid approach there. That's really because of the vision. Really, you want to make sure that whoever owns this, or at least is on that steering committee, is the one who is driving the vision, and that the vision is known, and that each project manager, program manager, developer, architect, release manager, they all understand how they fit into the vision of the COE and the vision of the next few years to get to that point in time.
So you've all said it's the CIO. So if I'm sitting in the business, I'm going, yeah, but what's IT ever done for me? So how are you funding this? So is it in the CIO's budget? And how do you get the business? And again, any of you can pick this up, but and I get it'd be interesting different perspectives, but how do you justify the cost of a Center of Excellence, which seems like a massive overhead and a bunch of red tape, as Sean said?
Hey, Ian, it's Matt. I'll jump in here. This is why Salesforce was born. That's truly the case, is that what has IT ever done for me is the reason Salesforce in the no software business was born. Because salespeople and marketing people realized I can go buy Salesforce from Mark Benioff and I can implement it with low impact, right? That's how it got in. That was the Trojan horse close to 20 years ago. It's over 20 years ago now, I think, that when it started. And it's moving further and further into the business, and it should be an overhead. Salesforce and systems should really be impactful enough to cross all levels of the business and be impactful enough to be revenue generators and be a cog in the cost of delivering whatever you're delivering. So it depends on where you are in the business evolution of this and the use of the system, but it should be the critical, in many cases, the critical point to productivity. So it can be the cost of the system, and the COE could be allocated. I think it should be allocated to the business and the business unit. And that also gives incentive to the business unit to be more productive with the system. As they give more input and use the system enhancements, they should get the benefit through productivity. So passing it right back through to the BU, it makes most sense.
I would agree with that. I think, I think we look at the tools as a way to streamline all of our processes, right? How do we make folks' jobs easier? How do we let them do things faster? How do we service our clients faster? So it's definitely a shared entity, and as mentioned, right, we're looking at if IT owns it, then IT should be able to set the priorities, right? So we look to our business stakeholders as partners, as the folks that are bringing in their priorities, and we're helping them figure out how to make that happen. And that's why that really justifies the shared cost.
If it's a shared cost, are you allocating the cost of the Center of Excellence and Salesforce's entire cost to the business? Is that how it gets shared out? Or does IT just have S&P Global has an IT budget, which is picking all the costs up, and then you're just allocating that back to business units? Because if you remember the whole sort of, you're in a restaurant and you're trying to split the bill up and goes, oh, well, I didn't have coffee, but you had a starter. It's all you end up in those discussions. So how do you manage that?
So I think from our perspective, that is key to building that stakeholder relationship. You try to remove yourself from the detail, and the proof is in the pudding of what you're delivering, right? So if you are able to deliver with excellence, to deliver on time, to again make their jobs easier, then it's integral, and the questions do get minimized. Of course, there's always finance, there's always those questions will be there, but by virtue of having a center of excellence, you can then have the tools and the process and procedure in place so that you're really delivering in an effective fashion, and it lessens the need for those types of conversations and sort of the picking at each individual line item, if you will.
Let me just move the conversation on then. So how do I, for those people who are listening out in the rest of the Salesforce world who are going, this is great, you've already got a Center of Excellence. How do I get started? I mean, how do I establish it? How do I build a business case? How do I build the justification for a Center of Excellence? And I mean, all three of you pitch in and have a view on that. I
would say you really want to understand where the struggles are now and where the bottlenecks are. And if you're having a conversation around a COE, regardless of organization, there's something wrong with the Salesforce instance. There's something that someone doesn't like about the way that applications are being delivered or integrations with the platform. there's a need that needs to be fixed. So you need to work on developing what that, business value would be, and you need to bring everyone to the table. So having worked with Center of Excellence in the past, I wouldn't say that the business necessarily wants to own the Center of Excellence, because it gets more into the nitty gritty about, release management and security policies and standards. The business doesn't really, they just want to make sure that, it works for them and their teams, for their process. They would rather they'd rather be at the table when decisions are being made, but have the OCIO or CIO own the actual implementation of the Center of Excellence. So I think understanding where to start, because I think, some companies out there have this idea that, we can package a Center of Excellence for Salesforce, and we can sell that to other organizations doing this kind of initiative. And it really doesn't work like that, because it all starts out in a different way. I started out with security and release management, but that's not always going to be the problem. There's always going to be a need that needs to be filled. And you really get buy-in by focusing on that, and then assurance that we are going to see drastic improvements in our delivery timeline because of the changes that we're making now. Because again, that's going to make everyone that is implementing this vision look successful to the rest of the organization. So I think it's more of getting that executive buy-in, and also providing a timeline of what are the KPIs that they're going to see improved, and what are the actionables that they can take from the kickoff call, from that business value going forward into the future.
Ian, I agree with Sean there on IT owning it. I do believe that CIO, CTO should own the Center of Excellence. As far as funding, though, just stepping back to that, I've always dealt with it as cost of overhead. In growth companies, IT and development and continued progress is an overhead. Unless you are, one division or one product process needs extra attention, there should be ongoing funding always for ongoing development. It's almost never stagnant. So that makes it easy to allocate it across the business, because theoretically, the back office systems are going to benefit everybody, benefit the company in the end. So that's one way to look at it. Larger projects where you have, things siloed or divisions, of course you can allocate it there, but many businesses should view their back office systems and their Center of Excellence as a core to their whole business.
I agree with that, Matt. When thinking about getting started from our perspective, I guess, well, maybe I should say from my perspective, I come at Salesforce as an architect, having, been sort of a solo admin way back when, to a consultant, to now having teams of folks. If I don't have sort of that governance structure, right, our standards, our data dictionary, our release process in place, if those aren't there, I can't deliver effectively, right? Something's going to go wrong. And so when you I think when you maximize the benefit of a COE, you've kind of got everybody aligned and moving in the same direction as far as how this tool is utilized by the company, what the benefit of it is, how it's adopted, all of those kinds of good things. And so people have to have trust in your capabilities and your team's capabilities. And so to me, if I don't have some of those core constructs in place, I'm not going to be excellent at what I do. And therefore folks are not going to trust that we're a reliable resource for them.
And also, just going back to the cost allocation, Mercy, I think you mentioned that most of your resources are in IT. I've worked in both environments, internally as well as with clients as a consultant. I really appreciate in the right size business where the owners and the participants of the Center of Excellence, project managers, and even some developers are in the business. If you have the right size company and management culture, it's really a special process to have ownership in the business. And, so you don't have a large IT group, and you have super users and super admins, if you will, in the business. I know it's a scary thought for many companies, but if you have the right culture and the right management structure, I have been in that business where I'm a CIO, CTO, but my resources are actually in the business and taking system leadership from me because it's backed by their leadership. So it's a very special process if that can happen, and is extremely efficient by super users being the super administrators for their segment of the business. But that is a narrow event, I think. It doesn't happen all the time, but that is a great thing when it does happen.
And one additional point while we're on the topic of funding. So I think it's important, and even putting someone from the business in a situation to be either single or co-platform owner. They don't own the center of excellence, but they own the platform. They own the direction of the product and the product roadmap. And I think something that if you are funding a center of excellence that's almost left out is if you have a COE body that is an entity that lives within IT and kind of operates with the power of the CIO or the CTO, you've got to have O&M resources there to support the implementation of the strategy. Because your center of excellence is going to talk about, we need these tools, or we need to have a standardization about how do we select tools for Salesforce. But then for pieces of that you want to implement on Salesforce itself, for let's say, project ideation. How does a project go from idea to investment to commitment to delivery internally on the platform? You need O&M to then build that for you. If you just have the idea body that is the center of excellence, you have advisory there, but you don't have anyone to implement that strategy. So it's very important to align both your O&M to your COE so that you can have something that really delivers change. Because if you don't factor that in, you're going to have a bunch of great ideas on how to work, but no one to take ownership of actually delivering those in a way that project managers and project delivery teams see.
So I think if I'm in a relatively small organization implementing Salesforce, I'd be actually quite frightened now, I think. But mainly because I think of what you've all said needs to be in place. But I think Salesforce is becoming a lot more strategic in organizations. So I think someone said earlier, it's a direction of travel. Salesforce is not going to be just in sales. It's going to be working its way to being more strategic, covering more areas. So I think wherever you are in your journey around Salesforce, everything we've been talking about will need to be in place at some point. And I think what I've heard from all of you is the earlier you get it in place, the easier it is. Would that be fair? There's some nods around the room. So therefore, this is not we'll do it at some point. This is, if you get it in early, it actually will support you in that growth, and actually it will make that growth easier. So, and can I just go around the table? What are the next steps? You've obviously got a fairly mature centre of excellence around, but that doesn't mean that's where you're stopping. What's the next plan, or what do we think we need to go and do next?
I would say that center of excellence is typically very critical in the implementation of these systems. But then as a business is growing, it's the ongoing project management. Where are we going to grow? What business unit needs resources? But there's also a focus on all of the other tools in the Salesforce ecosystem. Back when Salesforce started, it was just Salesforce, and it was just used by sales and marketing. And then all of the clouds expanded, and it virtually covers the Salesforce ecosystem, virtually covers every aspect of almost every industry, every business. So you should have an ongoing view of where can we move this more. There's very few industries that Salesforce can't be the core. You know, there's some proprietary systems that are the core in many businesses, but any growth business, almost of any type, can use Salesforce and customize it and then add on tools with the ecosystem to grow their business. That's the tremendous thing about the platform. You know, it's no or low code integration, you know, central database, you know, of record, and easy growth. So your center of excellence should be, you know, what can we do now? You know, where can we go from here? You know, if your business is stabilized, focus on what can we use this system to grow? You know, how can we exploit it?
Yeah, and the return on investment is infinite if you've got existing licenses and you build more capabilities on top of the existing platform.
Exactly.
I mean, the issue is the other way around, where we bought 1,000 licenses or 10,000 licenses and we've got 20% adoption. That's when the return on investment's hard. Building more applications which the same users can use. I mean, exactly.
Yes.
As the CIO, I'd certainly, our CIO spends his time around trying to kill spreadsheets. It's like,
it is a challenge to kill spreadsheets because it's an easy thing, but there are actually add-ons to Salesforce also that are you know, cloud-based you know, spreadsheet-like things that integrate to the data, and sometimes that is still an efficient way to use it. But you mentioned licenses. We haven't talked about that. Understand that's the role of the CIO group also, is to understand the licensing management process, because many people don't realize that you can implement it across your entire company based on licensing. Change the license structure, change the license model. Salesforce works with the clients to expand all the way out. You know, the various tiers allow you to expand it out, and many people don't understand that.
And to Matt's point, I think building out a master licensing dashboard with a view of, so if you're using 5 or 8 instances, even if you've got one, understanding what is the process if you don't see a lot of user engagement with a license. Those licenses, you know, they're not cheap. So you want to bring them back in to your pool, especially if you're using Experience Cloud and high volume. You want to make sure, what is my licensing strategy? How do I understand, you know, what can just be reallocated, and when do I actually need to buy licensing? And that can be a hard thing for people to get transparency on. And the platform owner is dependent on that, because he's got to keep those costs down as much as he can and make sure that they're actually getting a return. They don't want to have these licenses either sitting there for 6 months, not doing anything, or someone else is authorizing a purchase, and now I've got several hundred more licenses than I actually needed because of the communication. And I think that's what the Center of Excellence concept is really about. It's about communication and culture. Anything from release management to security policies, to the way that you deliver projects. It becomes an issue that's found within the communication channels. So if you just wanted to start there with communication channels and then focus on certain domains that you had brought up in previous slides, I think that's how small businesses really start with the COE. How do we communicate? You don't need to invest in these, you know, expensive tools to be able to implement a proper center of excellence. Just look at the way that you communicate, define those channels. Because if you're using, let's just say, several document storage applications, so let's say you're using Google Drive and Quip and Box, and people are storing information just at will, just put a policy in place on, you know, where you're storing sales information, where are project delivery teams putting status reports, where's the marketing team putting campaign ideation records. That it can be as simple as that. COE can be a hugely expansive project, or it can start off with those small wins, like establishing your stakeholder and communication strategy.
Fantastic. We're getting near the top of the hour. So one thought from each of you, either what's the most important thing about getting a center of excellence in place, or in hindsight, what do you wish you'd done? So Marissa?
Yeah, I think for us, or from my perspective, it really helps the management and the maintenance of the system. You know, when you think about, as Matt and Sean were talking about, license management, technical debt, all of those sort of things that can sneak up on you if you don't manage them properly. A center of excellence really gives us a good foundation to address a lot of those issues that make adoption and use of the system that much more challenging. So that's what I really find as you know, beneficial and important in the long run, is just, you know, making sure we can utilize this really awesome tool across the board.
The most important piece would be, if you're using an SI and if you're using multiple SIs for a more mature organization, to get SI buy-in, not just executive buy-in, because the executive can scream at the SI to do this, but if they're not committed to the idea, it's going to be really difficult for you to get traction. And if you're not using an SI for this type of work, just working within the organization to make sure that you've got designated resources that can help support the COE's vision, and to make sure that it's easy to find the process. You can create the process, but if it's not easy to find, you're just going to get pinged on Slack or Teams 1,000 times of where's the process, which goes back to communications management and stakeholder management. So I think understanding the different stakeholders in the organization and making sure that if the COE says something, it's as if it came from the CIO themselves.
The COE should drive change, and it should be able to quantify the cost of that change. And an ongoing, a healthy and effective COE has the business really understanding what it costs to maintain the systems. And, you know, I've been in very healthy environments where, you know, marketing says, I want to do this, and operations says, I want to do this. And IT says, well, it will cost this much to do each of your projects. And marketing would say, well, I'll give my budget to operations because I know it will affect the business, my business, more effectively. So the communication and visibility and transparency should be at that COE level. It really should be, in many businesses, the core of how the business operates, and the system should drive efficiency and visibility, transparency, and communication across the entire business. So most businesses should have a COE as a day-to-day, you know, or weekly, monthly operation, because it should be the core of the operation.
Every company runs on its systems, and every system now is changing as companies become more agile. So I think the discussions we've been having are at the heart of how you drive an agile business. So again, thank you so much for spending the time with us today. I could talk to you for the rest of the day, but I know you've got busy lives to get on with. So thank you so much for the panelists. For everyone who's listening, there will be a recording of this edited and sent out to all of you, so you can re-listen to various sections if you're trying to build a business case or you're trying to work out how to fund your Centre of Excellence. So thank you so much for joining us.